The thing in the water. I need you to understand something before I start. I've never been the type to scare easily. I grew up near the water. I know how the ocean sounds at night. That low, endless exhale against the sand. The way the tide pulls back like it's breathing. I know the difference between shadows and shapes. I've always trusted my gut, and my gut has always been steady. Until that night on the Carolina coast. I was 17, senior year. And honestly, the only thing that ever occupied my mind back then was this girl in my AP physics class. Her name was Maya. She had this dark hair that fell past her shoulders, and she always wore these oversized hoodies even in warm weather, like she was perpetually cold, or like she was hiding something. Half the guys in our grade had a thing for her. The other half were just scared of her. She had a reputation. Her exes, and there were a few, always described her the same way. She's a lot. That was the phrase. Just a lot. Brilliant, impulsive, intense, unpredictable. Some guys thought that made her dangerous. I thought it made her fascinating. None of that ended up mattering once the night went sideways. But I want you to picture her the way I did back then. Because understanding what I was thinking that night, the way my brain was completely distracted, helps explain why it took me so long to process how wrong everything actually was. My best friend since 6th grade was Derek. He was smoother than me, funnier. He had this effortless way of talking to people that I'd spent years trying to copy without success. Somewhere between mid-October and November of our senior year, Derek managed to get Maya's best friend Leah to agree to come hang out at the beach with us on a Friday night. Gulf Shores. It was early November, but the weather had stayed warm along the Alabama coast. One of those borrowed summer nights where the air still has heat in it, even after dark. The best part, Maya was coming too. Derek pulled up to my house just after 10. I climbed in the front seat and we spent the whole drive to pick them up running through the plan. We'd park, walk to the beach, and then somehow split off into pairs. Simple, manageable, terrifying. When Maya and Leah got in the car, things actually went well. Better than I'd expected. Maya was sharper in person than she seemed from across a classroom. She had this dry wit that caught you off guard, and she laughed at the right moments. Derek kept things loose and easy, and by the time we parked near the public access path, I felt like maybe the night was going to be exactly what I'd hoped. We hit the sand around 10:30. The beach was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for that hour in the off-season. No bonfires, no other couples, no one jogging the shoreline. Just us and the sound of the Gulf and the pale strip of moon cutting across the water. Derek did his thing. Within maybe 10 minutes of us all walking down together, he and Leah peeled off toward the dunes with this perfect, casual ease, like it had just happened naturally. I didn't even see the moment it occurred. 1 second they were there. Then they weren't. Maya and I kept walking toward the water. We got our feet wet. The Gulf at night in November has this particular quality to it. Dark and warm near the surface, cold underneath, like two different bodies of water stacked on top of each other. We walked along the tide line for a while, just talking. She asked me about my plans after graduation. I asked her about the colleges she was applying to. It felt real, not performed, the way things sometimes feel when you're trying too hard. Then she stopped walking. She was looking out toward the water, her hand half raised like she was about to point at something, but she held it there, hesitant. "What is that?" she said. I turned and looked in the direction she was facing. The surface of the Gulf stretched out dark and flat, barely lit by the moon. I didn't see anything at first. Just water. "What are you looking at?" I asked. She didn't answer. She was still staring. I walked forward toward the waterline, partly because I was curious and partly, I'll admit, because I wanted to look confident in front of her. The water crept over my feet and the cold hit my ankles immediately. I kept going until I was ankle deep, squinting out at the surface. That's when I saw it. Something tall, vertical, standing in the water maybe 30 or 40 yards out. Not floating, not swimming, standing. It was hard to process at first because the mind doesn't immediately accept things that don't fit its categories. I saw the shape before I understood it. A long, thin silhouette rising straight up out of the water, absolutely still. I took one more step forward. It moved, not quickly, not violently, just a slow, deliberate shift, like it had been aware of me the whole time and had simply decided to acknowledge that it was seen. I backpedaled fast, nearly losing my footing in the wet sand, and jogged back up to where Maya was standing. "There's a person out there," I said, keeping my voice low. Maya crossed her arms. Why would anyone be standing in the water at this hour? I didn't have an answer. She said she wanted to move, and I didn't argue. We walked further down the beach past a long stretch of dark sand until the area near our car was just a distant glow from a parking lot light. We sat down again. The ocean sound was softer here, and for a few minutes I actually forgot about the figure in the water. Maya was telling me a story about a road trip she took the previous summer, and I was watching the way she talked with her hands when she got animated, and I was thinking that maybe the weird shape in the water had just been a buoy, or a piece of driftwood standing at some odd angle. Then Maya grabbed my arm. "You hear that?" I went quiet and listened. There was a sound, faint, coming from the water, a soft, uneven splashing. Not the rhythm of waves, but something else. Something inconsistent. Something that had its own pattern. We both turned toward the ocean at the same moment. The figure was there again, further down the beach from where we'd originally seen it, but there. Same silhouette, same impossible stillness in the water. Just watching. Maya stood up. "I want to leave," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes weren't. I wanted to say something bold. I thought about waiting out there and demanding to know who it was. I thought about how that would look. But the truth is, something about the way that shape stood in the water, the complete unnatural stillness of it, had already gotten under my skin. You hear stories about gut instincts warning you away from things. This was that feeling. My gut had gone completely cold. We walked back to the car without running, but we were walking fast. Derek and Leah weren't back yet. I reached for my phone and saw the screen was covered in notifications, all from Derek. Apparently, he'd been texting in a near panic the entire time I'd been without reception near the water. The first text, sent about 20 minutes earlier, "Dude, there's some guy in the water, just standing there, watching us." 5 minutes after that, "Yo, this is weird. He's closer. Got a better look. Something is wrong with him. He doesn't look right." Then a few minutes later, "Get to the car, now. We're being followed. Answer your phone." And then the one that made everything cold at once. "It's not a person. I don't know what it is. We're coming back." The last text, sent just minutes before. I found the messages, heading to the car. "Be there. Do not go looking for us." I called him immediately. He picked up on the first ring, already out of breath. "Are you at the car?" he said before I could speak. "Yeah, we're here. What happened?" "Stay there." He hung up. 20 seconds later, Derek and Leah came out of the darkness between the dune grass at a near jog. Derek's face was doing something I'd never seen it do before. He wasn't scared often. He was scared now. He caught his breath against the side of the car and then tried to explain. He said that the figure had been following them along the waterline for the better part of 15 minutes. He said he'd gotten close enough at one point, stupid he admitted, to get a real look at it in the moonlight. And what he saw didn't line up with a person. The proportions were off. The limbs were wrong. It moved on two legs, but not the way a person moves. Something about the angles was wrong. Like the joints were. He stopped. I don't know. Backwards, almost. Leah nodded. She hadn't said a word since they got to the car. She just nodded slowly with her arms wrapped around herself. I told Derek what Maya and I had seen. He made me describe it twice. The standing shape in the waters. The way it had shifted when I moved closer. The way it had tracked us down the beach. That's what was following us, Derek said. Nobody laughed. Nobody offered an alternative explanation. And then, from somewhere beyond the dunes behind us, from the direction of the open beach, the direction we had all just come from, came a sound. I don't know how to write it down in a way that does it justice. It wasn't a human scream, though it had something human in the shape of it. It wasn't an animal sound, though it had the raw, unfiltered quality of something that didn't know it was being listened to. It was somewhere between those two things, and somehow worse than either. All four of us were in the car in about 3 seconds flat. Nobody spoke for most of the drive home. The boat at sunset. The beach town where I grew up was small enough that everybody knew everybody, which meant secrets didn't keep long. But it also meant that places that should have been safe actually were safe. Parents let their kids roam. The ocean was practically a second backyard. My family had lived in Gulf shores for most of my childhood. My parents, my younger sister Lily, my other sister Brooke, and me. Mom worked at the front desk of one of the resort hotels down the strip. Dad ran a small boat repair outfit near the marina. We weren't rich, but we lived 20 minutes from the water, which felt like the same thing when you were a kid. Lily was 13 that summer. I was 18. Just graduated working part-time at a bait shop near the pier while I figured out my next move. Brooke was 16, and in a phase where she took everything seriously, including beach volleyball, which she played with an intensity that made it look like a professional obligation. It was a Thursday evening in mid-July. The sky was doing that thing it does along the Alabama Gulf Coast in the summer, where the sunset turns the whole western horizon into something that looks like it belongs on a postcard. Deep orange bleeding into pink. The water going copper at the edges. Lily had been begging to go to the beach all week. I had the night free. Brooke wanted to work on her serve, so the three of us drove down to the public beach stretch and staked out a spot about 50 yards from a weathered volleyball net that had seen better days. Lily made a beeline for the water the moment her feet hit the sand. 10 minutes, I called after her. And don't go past where you can stand. She turned around long enough to wave at me in that way teenagers wave at older siblings, the bare minimum required to acknowledge you exist. And then she was in up to her shins, moving deeper. I watched her for maybe 60 seconds. Then Brooke found an old volleyball someone had left wedged against one of the net poles, half deflated but workable, and she started setting it against the net to practice her approach. I drifted over. Here's the thing I'll regret for the rest of my life. I only looked away for a few minutes. When I turned back toward the water, the sun was sitting heavier on the horizon and the light had gone amber and long-shadowed, and the Gulf was glittering in a way that made it hard to see detail. I shaded my eyes and scanned the waterline. Lily wasn't there. I did the rational thing first, scanned further along the beach in both directions, thinking she'd walked up or down the shoreline. She wasn't on the sand at all. I looked back at the water and tried to spot her in the surf zone. Nothing. My chest went tight. I told Brooke to stay put, and I sprinted to the water. I waded in fast, scanning left and right as the water came up to my thighs, then my waist. The dropping sun was directly in my eyes, and the glare off the water was making it almost impossible to see clearly. I went deeper, past where I could stand, and started swimming a slow, wide arc. She wasn't in the water. I treaded water for a moment, turning a full circle, trying to stay calm. That's when I saw the boat. It was anchored maybe 70 or 80 yards offshore. A large boat, the kind you don't expect to see resting that close to a public beach. White hull, upper deck with a canvas canopy, clearly expensive. The kind of boat that belongs in a marina surrounded by other expensive boats, not idling in the shallows during a family beach hour. But it was there. Lights on below deck. Faint noise. Voices, maybe music, drifting across the water. I swam to it. It took a few minutes of hard swimming. When I got to the hull, I found a small retractable swim ladder at the stern and hauled myself up, dripping, onto the back deck. The boat rocked gently under my weight. The laughter I'd heard from the water was clearer now, coming from below, from the cabin. A hatch door was propped open, and the light from inside was warm and yellow against the blue of the evening. I leaned toward the opening. "Hey, hello, I need help." The laughter stopped immediately. "I'm looking for my sister. She's 13. Have you seen a kid in the water?" A beat of silence. Then, from below, Lily's voice. She said my name. I went down the companionway steps so fast I nearly slipped on the last one. The cabin was low-ceilinged and narrow, fitted with bench seats upholstered in white cushions. Lily was sitting on one of the benches near the bow, holding a can of soda in both hands, her feet swinging slightly off the floor. She was fine. She looked fine. But across from her, sitting on the opposite bench with their backs against the hull, were two men. Grown men. Both of them probably in their 40s. One was heavy-set with a sun-reddened neck and a short-sleeved fishing shirt. The other was lean and tanned, with close-cropped hair and very pale eyes that found mine immediately when I came down the stairs. He read my face in an instant, saw the alarm on it, and leaned back with his hands slightly raised, casual, but deliberate. Hey, easy, the pale-eyed one said. She was out in the water by herself. Seemed like she'd gotten turned around. We just brought her in, gave her something to drink. The other one smiled at me. It was a friendly smile, I think. But there was something underneath it that I didn't like. Something that registered wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. I stepped past them without acknowledging either of them, put my arm around Lily's shoulders, and turned back toward the stairs. "We could give you a lift back to shore," the heavy one offered. "Save you the swim." I didn't answer. I helped Lily up the steps ahead of me, and I didn't look back down into the cabin. We slipped off the stern ladder and swam back to the beach together. By the time we were wading out of the shallows, the boat was already pulling up its anchor. Within a few minutes, it had moved off into the deeper water toward the horizon, disappearing into the gold-orange haze of the fading sunset. I wrapped Lily in a towel and sat her down on the sand. She told me she drifted out further than she meant to and gotten disoriented when she tried to come back. She'd seen the boat and swum to it because it was the closest solid thing. The men had helped her up and told her to wait inside while they figured out where her family was on the beach. That was her version. I didn't say anything to challenge it, but here's what I kept coming back to on the drive home. The boat had been anchored, not passing by, not drifting. It had been sitting there, stationary in shallow water just off a public beach during peak evening hours, and neither of those men had made any effort to flag down someone on the shore. or wave to attract attention or alert any of the handful of other families still on the beach. They'd just brought a 13-year-old girl below deck and given her a soda and waited. My dad was furious when we got home. Not at Lily exactly. He was past the point of yelling, had crossed into the quieter and more frightening version of anger where he just stared at a fixed point and spoke in very measured sentences. He was frustrated that I hadn't gotten names, or a boat registration number, or a better description of either man. He was right to be frustrated. He called the Marine Patrol non-emergency line and gave them what information he had. The officer who took the report was polite and non-committal. Drifting boaters weren't uncommon. Nothing technically illegal had occurred. Lily was banned from the beach after sunset for the rest of that summer. Dad drove her himself any time she went during daylight hours. I didn't argue with any of it. Some things you don't need explained in detail. To understand, someone was in the house. 3 years later, I had my own place. Not much. A small house about a quarter-mile back from the beach, in a quieter part of Gulf shores that mostly sat empty in summer, and even emptier in the colder months. I'd bought it with help from my parents as a long-term investment, the idea being that I could rent it out during peak season and use it during the off-season when rates dropped. It worked out reasonably well. My girlfriend at the time was Kara. We'd been together almost 2 years, met during a semester I spent at a community college in Mobile before I transferred. She was from upstate New York, Syracuse, and had never fully understood the southern relationship with warm weather until she experienced her first Gulf Coast January, which tends to sit around 60 degrees and feels like a mild spring to people who grew up scraping ice off their windshields. We'd planned the trip for early February, right at the point where Syracuse becomes genuinely unbearable. The kind of cold that isn't just cold, it's relentless and gray, and seems to have a personal grudge against you. We loaded up her car after work on a Thursday and drove south through the night, taking turns behind the wheel. We made it to Gulf Shores late on Friday evening. The drive from central New York to the Alabama coast is not a short one, pushing 16 hours with stops. And by the time we turned down my street and pulled into the gravel driveway, we were both running on fumes and the particular giddiness that comes from finally arriving somewhere you've been looking forward to for weeks. The house looked fine from the outside. Quiet. Dark except for the porch light, which ran on a timer. I'd kept the utilities on through the winter because the pipes needed to stay warm and because I visited frequently enough that shutting everything down and restarting it every time wasn't worth the hassle. So there was electricity, running water, a water heater that had already been heating water for days. All we had to do was unpack the car, change out of our travel clothes, and breathe. We didn't even do a full walkthrough. We were too tired. We grabbed our bags from the trunk, brought them into the main bedroom on the first floor, dropped them on the floor, and then Kara found 2 folding beach chairs in the mudroom closet, and we carried them out the back door and down the short path through the seagrass to the beach. We sat there for maybe an hour in the dark. The Gulf in February has a completely different personality than in summer. Quieter. Somehow more serious. The water is dark green-gray in the moonlight, and the beach is completely empty, not just of people but of everything. No birds, no boats, just the sound of the water moving back and forth in the dark. We hadn't even turned on most of the lights in the house, just the porch light and the lamp on the nightstand in the bedroom. Kara was half asleep in her chair when she sat up straighter. "Did you leave that light on?" she asked. I looked back at the house. One of the upstairs windows, the small bedroom at the far corner, which I used mainly as storage for off-season gear, had a light on. The curtains were partially drawn, the way I always left them when I'd been there last. But behind the gap in the curtains, clearly visible, was a shadow. Not a shadow cast by furniture or the angle of the light. A shadow with a shape. The shape of someone standing close to the window, looking out. Kara and I looked at each other. The calculation happened fast. Had I left that light on? No. I was certain I'd left the house dark when I'd left 6 weeks ago. The curtains had been fully drawn. The light had been off. And standing shadows don't come from furniture. I told Kara to stay in her chair. I went to the house at a jog, then slowed as I came through the back door. I left the lights off. I was barefoot, which turned out to work in my favor. The old hardwood floors in that house creak in specific spots I'd learned to avoid over years, and my bare feet felt them better than shoes would have. I got to the base of the stairs. I stopped and listened. The house was quiet. I went up the stairs slowly, keeping to the wall side where the boards were tighter. I was about halfway up when I heard a sound from above me. A single, deliberate click. A door being eased shut. I took the remaining stairs faster. The hallway was empty. 3 doors off it. The storage room closed, the bathroom open, and the second bedroom I sometimes used as a workspace open. The light under the door of the storage room was gone. Dark. I stood in the hall for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. I crossed to the storage room. The door was thin and old, and I could feel the slight vibration of my own footsteps in it. I put my ear against the wood and stayed completely still. Whatever was in there, if anything was in there, it wasn't moving. I grabbed the handle with both hands and yanked the door open fast. A closet of shelving, rubber storage bins, a rack of off-season gear, an old surfboard leaning against the far wall, all of it undisturbed, nothing out of place. I swept the flashlight from my phone across every corner. Empty. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I spun around and there was Kara in the hallway, arms crossed, looking pale. I wasn't happy about her coming inside. We had a brief argument in whispers in the hallway about it. Then we agreed to search the upstairs together, and she helped me go through both bedrooms and the bathroom and all the closets methodically, turning lights on as we went. No one. We went downstairs. Every room, every closet, under both beds, behind the water heater in the utility space off the kitchen. No one. No broken window, no forced door. No sign of entry anywhere in the house. We stood in the kitchen with all the lights on and looked at each other. Kara said quietly, "I saw the shadow too. I know what I saw. I know what we both saw. A light that had been off. A curtain that had been fully drawn. And behind that curtain, visible in the gap, the unmistakable silhouette of someone standing at the window. We locked every door and window in the house. We pushed the small bookcase in the hallway in front of the door at the top of the stairs. We checked that all the exterior doors were bolted. Then we went to the main bedroom and tried to sleep. We were lying in the dark, neither of us speaking, probably both pretending to be closer to sleep than we were. The house was completely still. The Gulf was barely audible this far from the beach. Then something moved under the bed. Not a settling sound. Not a creak from the house shifting. Something deliberate. A slow, quiet scrape of movement against the floor. The sound of a body repositioning itself in a confined space. Kara grabbed my arm. I got up slowly. I didn't turn on the light. I crouched at the edge of the bed and got down onto my hands and knees until my face was at floor level, looking into the dark space beneath the frame. 2 eyes looked back at me. A man was lying flat under my bed, maybe 18 inches from my face. For one suspended second, we just looked at each other, the way 2 people look at each other when they're both processing something too fast for words. Then he moved. He rolled, got his knees under him, and came out from under the bed on the far side in one fast, fluid motion. He hit the bedroom door at a run and was through it before I'd even gotten to my feet. I heard him cross the living room and hit the front door. It must not have been fully latched. And then the door banged open, and he was outside. I ran after him, but by the time I reached the front porch, he was gone. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. No footsteps on the gravel. No movement between the houses. Just the sound of the street lamp buzzing in the salt air. We searched the house one more time. Nothing was missing. No valuables disturbed. No indication of how he'd gotten in or how long he'd been there. We didn't call the police. Looking back, I understand how strange that sounds. But we were exhausted and shaken, and for some reason, the absence of any stolen items made it feel like something we should process quietly and move past. Like if nothing had been taken, maybe we could frame it as nothing more than a deeply unsettling incident, rather than something with a name and a case number. We were wrong to think that way. I know that now. The rest of the week we spent the doors deadbolted, windows locked, sleeping with the lights on in the hallway. Whatever rest of the vacation looked like, it looked nothing like what we'd planned. What the coast keeps. Here's something nobody tells you about living near the water your whole life. You develop a relationship with it. The ocean isn't passive. It has moods, patterns, a rhythm that you learn to read like a language. People who grew up inland never quite understand this. They see the beach as a destination, a place to visit and leave. If you grew up on the coast, the ocean is more like a neighbor. You learn its habits. You know when it's calm and when it isn't. You know which stretches of beach are safe at high tide and which ones aren't. You know which sounds are normal at 2 a.m. and which ones aren't. So when things happen on the beach that don't fit the pattern, they land differently. They land harder because you can't dismiss them as unfamiliarity. Every single incident I've described to you happened within about 30 miles of one another, on the same stretch of the Gulf Coast that I've known since I was old enough to walk to the water, without holding someone's hand. And every single incident had the same quality underneath it, that sensation of encountering something that refused to be categorized, something that slid past the part of your brain that identifies things and went straight to the part that responds. The figure in the water, the boat at sunset, the man under the bed. 3 separate nights, 3 separate years, 3 separate situations that should have had nothing to do with each other. But they all share something I've only recently been able to articulate. In each one, the thing that frightened us most wasn't the danger itself. It wasn't the figure, or the 2 men on the boat, or the face under the bed. The thing that frightened us most was the waiting, the deliberateness, the way each of these situations had clearly been arranged, not spontaneous, not accidental, but constructed. Set in place and then simply held there until we stumbled into them. The figure in the water didn't chase us. It waited. The men on the boat didn't take Lily. They waited. The man under the bed didn't attack us. He waited. That's the part I keep returning to. That patience. That willingness to simply be present and still and terrible in the dark until whatever was going to happen next happened. I want to tell you about one more night. The last one. Because in some ways it was the quietest, and in some ways it was the worst. It was late September. I was 23. I'd been living in Mobile for a couple of years by then, working in the logistics office of a freight company, and I came back to Gulf Shores for a long weekend to do some maintenance on the beach house before renting it out for the fall. Kara and I had broken up the previous spring. I came alone. I got in around sunset on a Friday. did a quick walkthrough of the house to check for anything that needed immediate attention, and then walked down to the beach as the last of the daylight faded. I had a beer and I sat in the sand and watched the water go from copper to gray to black. I was out there for maybe 45 minutes before I noticed the man on the beach. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out details, just a figure, standing in the sand about 200 yards down the beach in the direction the beach curved south, standing still, facing the water, the same direction I was facing, which was normal. People stand on the beach. People look at the water at night. But after about 5 minutes, I noticed he hadn't moved at all. Not even a small shift of weight, the way people move when they're standing in sand and adjusting their balance. He was completely still. I watched him for another couple of minutes. Still nothing. I looked away, back at the waters. Maybe a minute went by. Then I looked back toward the figure. He was closer. Not dramatically closer. Maybe 50 yards, not 200. But the difference was undeniable. He'd covered 150 yards of beach without me seeing him move, without any sound of footsteps in the sand, in the time it took me to look at the water and look back. The same quality as the figure from 6 years ago. The same stillness. The same patient, deliberate presence. I didn't freeze. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked back to the house at a steady pace. I didn't run. Something in my gut said running was the wrong call. That moving fast and panicked was different from moving calm and deliberate, and that the distinction might matter. I got back to the house. I bolted the back door. I turned on the lights and did another walk-through, checking every room. No one. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. I made coffee I didn't drink. I kept the lights on in every room for the rest of the night. In the morning, I went back out to the beach. The sand was soft and easy to read, the way sand is after a calm night. I walked down to where the figure had been standing. There were footprints there. Clear, deep-set prints where someone had been standing for a long time. The sand was compressed and smooth in the foot shapes, the way it gets when weight is being applied and held. The prints went to the water's edge. They didn't come back. I don't know what to make of any of this. I've thought about it from 100 angles over the years. I've come up with rational explanations for pieces of it, and watched those explanations fall apart when I apply them to the whole. What I know is this. The coast is not just a place. It's a specific kind of environment, isolated in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, dark in ways that go beyond the absence of light. There are hours on a beach at night when you become acutely aware that the ocean is a very large and very old thing, and that the thin strip of sand you're standing on is the boundary between your world and something else. And on that boundary, in those hours, the things that shouldn't be there tend to gather. We go to the beach for the water. We go for the sun and the sound, and the way it makes us feel like we've escaped something. But the beach has always been there, whether we came or not. And whatever shares that space with us in the dark has been there a lot longer than we have. The next time you're at the beach after dark, and you hear something that doesn't fit, and you see a shape in the water that doesn't quite make sense, trust that feeling in your chest, the cold one, the old one. It knows something your rational mind doesn't. Walk back to the lights, don't run, and don't look behind you. That's all 3 stories. Thanks for reading to the end. If you felt that pull, that need to keep going even when part of you wanted to stop, that's the coast doing what it does. It holds you, even when it shouldn't.